Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hawks Nest. Well, our Seahawks went on the road and came away with a pretty dominant victory against the Arizona Cardinals. Let's dive on in.
Tries to sample screen. It's intercepted. Clowney. 20, 15, 10, 5. Hello. Mr. Clowney, touchdown. Seahawks. Jadeveon Clowney stretched out. Reached his arm almost to the ceiling. Jadeveon.
Well, Jadeveon Clowney started off the festivities just right when he picked off a little outlet pass to the running back and then housed it for the first score of the game, put Seattle up on top, and we led throughout the whole rest of the way from end to end, bell to bell, as they like to say. Those of you out there that are subscribed to the channel know that I was a huge proponent of bringing in Clowney prior to the trade, and then very happy once the trade had been consummated. So it's lovely to see him out here wrecking shop, just being the monster that I thought he would be. And the important part of this is people really got caught up in Jadeveon Clowney and the sack numbers and what he had produced in sacks for the Houston Texans. And I always came back and said, you know, the one thing you really should quantify this with is, number one, he's a dominant run defender, might be the best or one of the best edge run defenders in all of football. But beyond that, look at the pressure stats, the pressures, the QB hits. Those are the stats that get deeper into things. Sacks can kind of fluctuate. They can kind of come and go. Look at Shaquille Barrett. He's the guy leading the league in sacks right now. He's on pace to set an NFL record in sacks. But this is a guy that's had a middling career with the Broncos, never became much of anything with it. Obviously, I believe the pass rushers do take a little while to develop, but he's certainly not in that mode of where Barrett is now, where he is literally the top pass rusher so far in this early NFL season. So sacks can definitely kind of fluctuate at times, and sometimes they're reliant on your other teammates doing work that doesn't necessarily show up on that bottom line stat. But when you look at pressures, when you look at quarterback hits, these are the stats that tell you somebody is actually causing havoc. They're interrupting, they're causing the play to be upset. And that's where Clowney really comes into play, where you watch him throughout the game, and maybe he's not in that Khalil Mack, Reggie White mode of just dominating every play, blowing every single play up. But what he is he's a play wrecker. Play in and play out, he's going to cause the offense problems, and they have to account for what he is doing and where he's doing it. And you saw that in this game against the Cardinals. He didn't have a sack, but he had a lot of pressures. He was very active. And again, he's been just what we thought he would be as advertised in the run game, in the respect of nobody's been able to run the ball in us. And I think he's a big component of that, especially when you factor in that Jaron Reed is still on suspension. So still loving that trade. Still want to say that if you're looking at sacks with Clowney and trying to judge the trade by that merit, you're looking at all the wrong things.
Yeah! I told y'all! We gonna beat that! And we did! Oh yeah!
This is what I would call a blueprint victory this week, in the respect of this is exactly how Pete Carroll wants to win and play football games. Run the ball consistently from the first quarter through the fourth quarter, eating up the time of possession, protecting his defense, and then conversely on the defensive side of the football, limit the big plays and touchdowns, and keep the opposition to field goal attempts. But built within this, completing the circle of toughness, as Pete Carroll likes to call it, is the special teams unit. And this is very important in the respect of the last few years, the special teams has not been a benefit to the team. It's been a minus. Of course, when Tyler Lockett first came on the scene, he was getting a ton of kick returns and punt returns and housing it all over the place, but that slowly has sort of drizzled and fallen off to the point that he's not getting any returns at all. And then our special teams coverage units, both in the kick and punt return game, have been bad as well over the last couple of years. We've seen some big time returns taken back. Then you add on top of this that the kicking game has been horrible as well, right? We had a little bit of a line of guys come through with the Blair Walshes and the Sebastian Janikowskis, and it got so bad last year that Janikowski literally blew out his hammy just trying to kick a field goal in that playoffs against the Cowboys. And that field goal was at the time very important when he missed it, or didn't miss it, but blew out his leg even trying the kick. So it's good to see that Seattle has put resources back into that component of this team. We, of course, drafted Michael Dickinson. We spent some money on Myers this last offseason. Certainly, Tyler Lockett still has the ability to give you some great returns. And in drafting all the players that they did in this last draft, collecting those draft picks, theoretically speaking, you would have better talent in your special teams units at that point because you'd have better depth. And so you'd be better in defending against those punt and kick returns. So it was a little disconcerting last week when we saw the Saints house a punt return against us. And again, just kind of continuing a trend we'd seen in recent years. Now, Seattle's been very good this year so far as on the special team side of the ball. The only other thing they made a mistake was I think we had a personal foul penalty against the punter in the first game against the Bengals. But outside of that, they've been very solid. But for this team to be great this year, for us to be a great team, a team that not only can compete for a division title, but for the Super Bowl, the special teams unit has got to be great. Not just all right, not just a minus. There are teams out there that can have one facet that's not as good, that is even failing, I would offer. Take a look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They've got a phenomenal offense, a phenomenal special teams unit, and a defense, So they get away with that a little bit because they can put a ton of points up on the board. They can get a kick or a punt return with Tyreek Hill, and they can overcome that. But with Seattle, we've really had all three units that have been built to be solid. They've sort of taken all of their resources and equally distributed them everywhere. So this special teams unit has got to be phenomenal for us. It's got to be great. And if it's not, you're going to see what happened last week with the Saints. We cannot afford to give up kick and punt returns with the way that this team is built. We keep the game close. We want to run the football ideally. As we saw where Russell's throwing for 400 yards, you really don't want to necessarily turn into a wide open, throw it all over the football field type team. And we didn't see that this week. It was nice and solid run, so it's good to see us get back to what we want to do from a blueprint standpoint. But that special teams unit has got to remain a plus. They've got to be a benefit to this team because if they've been a minus like they have in recent seasons, that will upend the season, and that will keep us from being a great team.
Carson spins out of the tackle, breaks it outside, left, steps over a man, runs out of bounds. Across the 40-yard line is a first down.
Boy, Chris Carson sure looked an awful lot like Marshawn Lynch out there, didn't he? It's great to see Carson bounce back after last week's performance where he had a couple of fumbles. He's had a couple of fumbles this year, so the 12th Man Nation, there's certainly a segment of fans that are calling for his head, saying he should be benched. They look at the plethora of talented running backs behind him, and they say we've got more than capable guys behind him if he can't hold on to the ball. And while I do believe that if it became some epidemic problem with him where he was just fumbling all over the place, that you would have to move somebody else in as a starter and limit his carries, I'm not at that point yet. And I think Pete Carroll brought it up best when he showed some of the stats on Walter Payton to Chris Carson this last week. I think Walter Payton had over 50 fumbles in his career. And Marshawn Lynch as well had his share of fumbles when he was here with the Seahawks. It certainly wasn't an issue, but he fumbled a decent amount of times. And I would just offer that when you have a running back that is one of those type of running backs that's very hard to bring down, it's going to be what we call the price of doing business. In that if you have a running back that's not going to be brought down by multiple defenders, there's going to be some last minute fumbles that come out of the gate because of that. And you're just going to have to a degree, deal with a little bit of that, because the flip shot of that, the benefit of that, is that in the third and the fourth quarter, you've got a back that's wore those defenses down, and you can close games out a lot easier because that back has done the damage he's done throughout the first half and the first three quarters. So keep your head up when it comes to Carson. Don't get too down on him. He'll have his occasional fumbles, but again, he's also going to run hard as hell like we saw this last week, and he's a problem for the rest of the league.
Hey, yo, you got out this bitch, man. Every day we go hot, man. Let's do it. Y'all got that business, go get this bitch. Let's go. Dominate on 3, 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
Defensively, there's some really nice things to get excited about as we go forward in this season. I thought at the start of the year, the route for the Seahawks to become a dominant defensive team laid, and then becoming a solid, if not spectacular, front four team. And this was, of course, pushed along by a Jadeveon Clowney trade. But we're starting to see as they round out that this could potentially be that difference maker for us on that side of the football. You've got your bookends with Clowney and Ansah. Poona Ford looks still great in the run-stopping game. You obviously still have Jaron Reed coming back, and you hope he can maybe give you some pass rush from that interior. But as well, we're seeing some great development finally from Quentin Jefferson. And one of my points that I harp on, one of my mantras here with this channel, is that usually pass rushers take some time to develop. They don't tend to come out of the box as great. They may have a skill or two, but they've got to kind of work it along, and eventually 3-4 years into their career, they could actually be pretty solid pass rushers. Look at a guy like Shaq Barrett this year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who's been middling throughout his career, and now he suddenly has this takeoff season where it all kind of clicks. I would offer that that's sort of happening here with Quentin Jefferson. When you look at him right now, he's 10th in the NFL in pressures In all the NFL, he's 10th in pressures. And remember, I was mentioning this earlier in the episode that a lot of people get caught up in sacks. I like to get caught up in pressures because that truly is the metric for disruption that you want to pay attention to. And I believe he's sitting at 16 pressures for the year. Very interestingly, Aaron Donald's at 18. Now, I'm not saying Jefferson's having the same kind of impact, but it's just worth noting that there's a lot of special names on that list that he's around right now. And if this guy gives us that X factor on that defensive line in the respect of depth and quality, and he actually gives us a certifiable pass rusher in there with all the guys that we have rounding into shape, that's where this defense becomes dominant. Because you bring Jarran Reed back in now and nobody has to play 80% of the snaps. Everybody rotates nicely and gets nice and fresh. You've got Rasheem Green and LJ Collier backing up Ziggy Ansah and Clowney to keep their snaps at an acceptable level. This is the route for the Seahawks defense to become dominant. So Jefferson's development is going to be very key in that, and it's awesome to see him doing so well this year. It's not just the 2 sacks in that openers, the Bengals. Every game he's getting good, decent, consistent pressure, and it's something to get very excited about for the Seahawks defense as we move forward. I am so excited for this game. We got the eyes of the nation upon us. We've got our toughest divisional opponent coming into town. And I feel like if we can win this game, we not only put ourselves in good position to win the division, but you keep yourself in that prime spot to eventually maybe be in contention for that first round bye and home field advantage throughout the playoffs, which we have seen as absolutely imperative to us getting back to the Super Bowl. We've tried to go out on the road and do it through that method, and it doesn't seem like it really works. It's too much of an uphill climb. We need that home field advantage. So getting an early win here would go very far to getting you there, because when you look at the second half of the schedule for the Hawks, while there are tough games on the schedule, most of those tough games are played at home, and some of your easier games are actually going to be played on the road. So getting this win gives you that little bit of buffer to set you up in that prime spot to keep you in contention for that thing that's a necessity to get back to the Super Bowl. So very excited for this game. I hope we can come away with the win. Great victory this last week. Thank you as always for watching, subscribing, commenting. I mean, it really does help this channel grow tremendously. And as always, do not any of you out there forget, go Hawks.